Number 9. Louis Bennett and Isabella Hellman. In May of 2017, Louis Bennett and Isabella Hellman, both in their early 40s, were honeymooning in the Florida Straits on Bennett's catamaran that had been sailing to the US coast from Cuba. Bennett told the Coast Guard that he was sleeping below deck when the vessel struck something in the darkness. He then discovered that Hellman, his wife and mother to his young daughter, had disappeared from the helm of the sinking catamaran. However, the authorities discovered evidence that it had been scuttled intentionally, through holes deliberately drilled in its hull. Hellman's body was never found in spite of Bennett's claims that she'd been wearing a life jacket. Even though he claimed to be devastated by the loss of his partner, there was nothing to indicate that he had made any efforts to look for her. He didn't fire flares to illuminate the water or activate the vessel's electronic homing device. It was only after 45 minutes, and when he was already on the life raft, that he radioed for help. Coast Guards also found him with a trove of silver coins worth over $40,000 that he'd previously reported stolen from his employer. It also emerged that the couple had been bickering over their finances, and that Hellman had no idea how her partner earned his money. Prosecutors initially accused Bennett of murdering his wife to put an end to their marital strife and inherit her wealth. He ultimately pled guilty to the lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 8 years in a US prison. Number 8. Sven Fouché and Chantel Bayer. In 2013, newlyweds Sven Fouché and Chantel Bayer were on a trip to the Aloe Ridge Game Reserve near Johannesburg, South Africa. The honeymooners went on a safari and encountered a group of rhinos. The wildlife expert accompanying them encouraged Fouché and Bayer to stand closer to the animals for a photo. They were both smiling for the camera, with their backs turned to them. Fouché would subsequently recall the fear he'd seen in the wildlife expert's eyes after he'd taken the photo. Fouché turned around and saw that the rhino was right behind them. Moments later, 24-year-old Bayer was gored and flung several feet into the air after the rhino's horn had penetrated her chest from behind. She survived the attack, but it had left her with injuries to her shoulder, several broken ribs, and a collapsed lung. Number 7. Stephen and Jeffany Kramer. In 2018, US Navy veteran Stephen Kramer disappeared during a honeymoon vacation to Hawaii. Stephen and his wife Jeffany were staying at a resort in Kunakakai, Molokai. They'd arrived on September the 9th, the day after their wedding. 9 days later, Stephen, who was an avid hiker, started exploring the area for a trail that they could go on together. In the afternoon, he texted Jeffany that he was on his way back but never returned. A search party was mounted for the 27-year-old after his wife reported him missing. The rescue effort was complicated by the fact that Stephen's phone was either turned off or had run out of battery, meaning the authorities couldn't track it. 4 days after his disappearance had been reported, Stephen's body was found in Pier Gulch, about half a mile from the resort. It was at the bottom of a 150-foot drop off a cliff, with a freshly fallen boulder next to him. Investigators determined that he hadn't been crushed by the massive rock. The most likely scenario was that he'd leaned against it to look over the edge, at which point smaller rocks beneath it began to crumble, thus triggering the collapse and causing Stephen to fall over the edge as well. Number 6. Christine Fensom and Andy Bennett. In September of 2016, British woman Christine Fensom died during a dream honeymoon to Cancun, Mexico. The mother of 3 had lost her first husband to a hit and run in 2004. She had struggled to cope with his passing for years until she met Andy Bennett. They had become romantically involved, and after tying the knot on September the 17th, the couple left for South America. While there, 54-year-old Fensom woke up one night feeling terribly ill, with symptoms that included diarrhea, weakness, and what her husband described as funny sounds coming from her throat. She was rushed to a hospital where she passed away from heart failure within 10 minutes of arrival. It was later determined that she'd suffered fatal ciguatoxin poisoning from eating contaminated fish. The illness, called ciguatera, is triggered by toxins found on algae in various reef ecosystems around the world, including the Gulf of Mexico. It's consumed by smaller fish, which in turn are predated upon by larger species, such as barracudas or groupers. It's believed that Fensom had eaten a grouper, which had the poison in its system. Ciguatoxin can't be destroyed by conventional cooking and has no specific taste or smell. As the most common form of seafood poisoning, ciguatera is rarely lethal, but there's no treatment once it sets in. Number 5. Mohammed Malik and Noor Shah. In the fall of 2020, a newlywed Manhattan couple died while vacationing in the Caribbean after they were caught in a strong riptide. 4 days after they'd had their wedding in Long Island, 26-year-old Mohammed Malik and his bride, Noor Shah, aged 29, were at a Turks and Caicos Islands resort. According to witnesses, they'd been swimming in chest-deep water when they were pulled away by the current. They tried hard to fight it but were swiftly dragged underwater. Bystanders intervened and succeeded in bringing them to shore, where they performed CPR. Unfortunately, the couple, both respected members of New York's Pakistani-American community, were pronounced dead at the scene. In the aftermath, Malik's father was critical of the resort for not putting up signs to warn tourists about the potential dangers. Number 4. William and Blakely Harrell. In November of 2020, a newlywed NASCAR crew member and his wife were killed in a brutal car crash in the Florida Keys. 30-year-old William Rowdy Harrell and his wife Blakely, 23, had married on November the 21st in their native Alabama. William, who'd worked in the pit crew of Hendrick Motorsports for 8 seasons, was also a former college linebacker for the Alabama Crimson Tide. He was behind the wheel of a 2020 Toyota Corolla as the couple was on their way to honeymoon in Florida 4 days after their wedding. He was northbound on US 1 when he crossed the center line and into the path of a Ford F-250 pickup truck. The other driver had tried to avoid the couple's vehicle, but they collided head-on. William and Blakely died at the scene. The driver of the oncoming vehicle only sustained minor injuries, while his 2 passengers were in a more serious condition, but the extent remains unclear. A toxicology report performed by the Florida Highway Patrol found alcohol and marijuana in William's system, which may have contributed to the accident. Number 3. Ben and Catherine Milani. In 2008, on the last day of a 2-week honeymoon to Antigua, a Welsh couple was robbed and then executed. At around 5 a.m., other guests from the luxurious Coco's Hotel reported hearing gunfire. After intruders had broken into their room, Catherine Milani and her husband Ben were forced to kneel beside their bed. The couple, both 31, was then shot in the back of the head. Catherine died instantly, while Ben fell in a coma and was flown back to Swansea. About a week after the shooting, he too passed away. The couple's phones, cash, and a camera were among the items stolen from the room. Avi Howell and Cannell Martin were subsequently arrested and charged with murder. They were located after SIM cards registered to them were activated in the stolen phones. The men were also found guilty of killing 43-year-old shopkeeper Juanetta Anderson. It took a jury only 10 hours to convict them to life in prison. The honeymoon killings, as the media had dubbed them, shocked the nation of Antigua, which up to that point had a great reputation as a holiday destination. A few years later, Howie and an accomplice, who'd reportedly been incarcerated for fraud, escaped from prison. They cut through a wire fence and scaled a 30-foot-high wall. The police later confronted the 24-year-old fugitive at a rural parish just south of the capital. He was shot in the knees and later succumbed to his injuries. Today's topic was requested by Nakia Rohn. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Shrien and Annie Dewani. A few weeks after their wedding in 2010, Shrien and Annie Dewani were honeymooning in South Africa. They'd spent 4 days on safari in the Kruger National Park before arriving at a 5-star hotel in Cape Town. After spending most of their Saturday lounging at the luxurious resort's pool, they decided to explore the city later in the evening. After an hour and a half of being driven around in a local taxi and taking in the sights, they opted to leave the safer tourist area to have a look at a township a few miles away. They were stopped at a junction in Guguletu by 2 armed men. One of them tried to use his weapon to smash through the driver's window. The attackers pulled the driver out, then took off with the couple still in the taxi. They took Shrien and Annie's valuables but claimed that they only wanted the vehicle and weren't going to hurt them. They later threw Shrien out of the car and drove off with Annie. After being left alone in the middle of the township, Shrien convinced a local man to call the police. The authorities drove around with Shrien in the car but were unsuccessful in locating the attackers. On Sunday morning, Annie's body was found abandoned in the taxi in a different township. She'd been abused and shot at least 3 times. A long legal battle ensued in which the suspects tried to paint Shrien as the mastermind of a murder-for-hire plot targeting his wife. The allegations made global headlines but were ultimately discredited, with Shrien deemed innocent by a South African court in 2014. It was discovered that the hijacking hadn't been random, but planned by the taxi driver, Zola Tongo, working in cahoots with the hijackers. Mzimwa Madoda Kwabe and Zolil Ngeni. Tongo and Kwabe were given sentences of 18 and 25 years respectively, while Ngeni was sentenced to life in prison. Number 1. Ralph and Crystal Jankers. In 2019, a newlywed German man faced manslaughter charges after fatally perforating his wife's bowel during a prolonged lovemaking session. 49-year-old Crystal Jankers died only days after walking down the aisle with Ralph, aged 52, in Krefeld, a city in North Rhine-Westphalia. Instead of going on a traditional honeymoon, the couple opted to celebrate their marriage with a 48-hour bondage session. It was during this time that Ralph used a spiked 8-inch hook on Crystal. When the adult toy was removed, it perforated a woman's bowel. Ralph called the emergency services 4 days later, but paramedics were unable to save her. When questioned why he hadn't sought help for his wife sooner, Ralph claimed that he didn't understand how serious her condition was, as she'd complained about stomach discomfort in the past. A self-confessed sadomasochist, he told the authorities that everything that occurred between him and Crystal had been consensual, adding, "It was our honeymoon period." According to the woman's adult son, whom described her as mentally unstable, Ralph had abused her in the past. He believed that the violence and humiliation extended past the consensual confines of the bedroom, but affirmed the belief that Crystal did indeed love her husband. A court determined that Ralph had been grossly negligent but found no grounds for a manslaughter charge. Ralph was given a suspended sentence for grievous bodily harm and left the court a free man. Thanks for watching. Would you rather honeymoon on a deserted island with no supplies or eat nothing but honey for a month? Let us know in the comments section below.